So within the universe of the Expanse, one of the largest wars seen across the system was the UN-MCR War, which saw the United Nations facing off against the Martian Congressional Republic, and I figured today we could take a closer look at some of the causes of that conflict and what led to the largest military engagement in the history of humanity. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoy this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So the UN-MCR War was, as I mentioned, a war between the United Nations and the Martian Congressional Republic, sparked following a series of incidents over Ganymede, and it saw the entire system embroiled in vicious conflict. Well, the war started in the Jovian moons and spread from moon to moon before eventually occurring in between Earth and Mars. It started with proto-molecule research and a changing system. So to understand what led to this war, let's just start with the basics. Before we begin, let's talk about some of the basics here. Earth and Mars have never really gotten along. To the people of Mars, Earth has always seemed to take their blue paradise for granted. They have vast, breathable atmospheres and expansive oceans, and they seem to be polluting them with garbage and fueling man-made climate change that is slowly destroying their world. Well, Mars is trying to do the opposite, turn a dead world into a paradise. Meanwhile, for the people of Earth, Mars seems like spoiled children, militaristic on top of that, which rubs a lot of the people of Earth the wrong way. Combine that with the fact that both powers have relatively equal military capabilities, with the argument that Earth is slightly more capable than Mars, and you end up with a situation where both sides really can vilify each other. And when you really boil it down to that circumstance, you end up with the sort of dichotomy that you see in the real world, where there's always at least two really powerful nations that will face off against each other from different ends of the world. Well, it's the same concept, but in space. You have two equally powerful nations. They are destined to dislike one another. So with that out of the way, and understanding the sort of military dichotomy of the system, with these two powers preparing to face off against one another in a military confrontation, constantly trying to one-up one another in a Cold War-esque arms race, you can sort of see the stage is set for the spark that lights the powder keg. So let's talk about that spark. You see, the status quo had been maintained for quite some time, and it took a pretty big shift to cause things to collapse, and that big shift was the invention, or more appropriately discovery, of a piece of alien technology, the proto-molecule. The proto-molecule had vast military and civilian potential. However, it was co-opted mostly by military organizations. Both Earth and Mars had independent proto-molecule research programs being carried out by the same company, Protogen. However, both sides were oblivious to each other's military endeavors there. However, things surrounding Protogen start to get a little bit out of hand. When an issue occurs with a group of OPA soldiers trying to board a Protogen ship and commandeer a sample of the protomolecule, the end result is ultimately a skirmish that leads to the destruction of the Doniger, a Martian battleship, by unknown assailants. Now, the people of Mars believe that Earth is behind the destruction of their battleship, seeing as no other power in the system would feasibly have that capability. Earth is confused because they didn't do it, and the Martians lost a battleship, and the entire system is already teetering on the edge, and then comes the Eros Incident. The Eros Incident was the end result of a large-scale protomolecule research project gone awry, where the protomolecule was released onto the large and populated station on Eros, and the end result was that Eros was basically turned into a weapon, with the asteroid itself careening towards Earth. Now, this asteroid was eventually diverted off by the actions of a few rogue individuals and ended up impacting Venus instead. However, the shock from the Eros incident was widespread. Well, it was technically tied to the UN's proto-molecule research. The elements within the government that knew about that research endeavored to keep it a secret, and as such, they tried to sweep it under the rug. The general consensus among the leaders on Earth was that the Eros incident was a failed Martian weapons test, or even a failed Martian attack. Meanwhile, the people of Mars, and the Martian government basically as a whole, was working on the assumption that Eros was a UN weapons test that had failed miserably. And this leads us to the Ganymede Incident, which was ultimately the spark that lit the powder keg. Now, the interesting thing about the Ganymede Ganymede Incident is there's actually two skirmishes that make up this incident. The first skirmish resulted from a failed Martian protomolecule weapons test in which a human protomolecule hybrid was released into UN lines. The end result, however, is that it scared UN Marines into charging the Martian sort of front line, and the end result of that was that they started shooting at each other. Soon, both space forces were shooting at each other up in orbit, and this resulted in the destruction of one of the orbital mirrors above the agricultural facility on Ganymede, and UN forces ultimately being driven temporarily away from Ganymede. This ended the first skirmish and led to a humanitarian crisis on the surface of Ganymede. However, the second skirmish was initiated when UN forces shot down a Martian corvette-class frigate that was en route to the surface of Ganymede to collect the protomolecule research scientists. In response to the downing of the Karakoon, this corvette-class frigate, the Martian forces opened fire on the UN fleets nearby, and the Second Battle of Ganymede began. This battle would ultimately expand into the larger UN-MCR War. Now, I've actually done a video diving into the specifics of the Ganymede Incident and the sort of tactics that were used during both the first and the second skirmishes, and if you'd like to check that out, I'll leave a link to that up here. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments what you think about the way the UN-MCR War started. Do you think it makes sense, or do you think that there really was an opportunity in all of this for peace to prevail? Do you think this war was inevitable, or do you think it could have been avoided? And if you have anything else from the Expanse you'd like to see me cover, let me know down below as well. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.